Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for making it out to this wonderful book launch tonight. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Han. I'm an event coordinator here at Shelf Life Books, and I'm joined by Matthew James Weigel. And so Matthew is a Dene and Métis poet and artist. He is the designer for Moon Jelly House Press, and his words and art have been published in ARC, The Polyglot, and Mamawi Project. Matthew is a National Magazine Award finalist, a Cécile E. Mactagrat Award winner, and winner of the 2020 Vallum Chapbook Award. His chapbook, It Was Treaty, It Was Me, was winner of the 2021 B.P. Nicole Chapbook Award. Whitemud Walking is his debut collection, which we are all here to listen and talk about. We at Shelf Life Books acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Treaty 7 people, the Blackfoot from Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Dene Sarsi, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda from Morley, the Bears Paw, Chiniki, and Wesley First Nations. We also walk in the footsteps of the Métis people from Region 3, Métis Nation of Alberta. I'm now going to hand things over to the main event for some reading and some sharing.
Hey there.
Take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Apologies, there was a clatter. Nisha knocked over some pens and stuff, but we're all good, which I'm sure she's stoked that I mentioned. It's always weird to have your bio read out in a room of like 4 people or 5 people, so I do appreciate appreciate it nonetheless. It's great to see familiar faces, Carla and Lisa, of course, as well. I'm a little, it's unfortunate we can't obviously do all of our events in person all of the time. However, that being said, I get to be here in my space in Edmonton, and you all get to be in your spaces wherever that happens to be, which is awesome and great, and makes it both a cozier event as well as a more accessible event at the same time. So I do appreciate how we're able to all be here together this evening. It looks like it might rain. It's getting a little chilly. I'm here in Edmonton, specifically in Strathcona, down the street from me, which is a street called the Old Fort Hill Trail, road/trail, which is a trail that for thousands of years, my ancestors and relations would have walked down to get down to the river at a place called Peonan, or a Peonan. There are multiple, and this means waiting place in Nehiawewen. And that trail intersects with the old Calgary and Edmonton Railroad line, which is a fascinating bit of local history, which I may talk a little bit about. But the reason its significance to me here is that it does intersect with that sort of trail. And so it's good to think about how all of these stories connect, and they take place in a place, and that place is important. And here we are to share some of those stories. So I'm going to start reading a few things from my book, which came out recently, and we are here to talk about, which I'm very excited. It's one of those things where you spend like 3 years on a project, and then you get the end result of that project in your hands, and it's a really strange thing, because on the one hand you're like totally ready to stop talking about the thing that you've been working on for 3 years, just when everyone else is getting their first taste of it. However, I'm always very excited to talk about the many things that I learned and share them with you all. So this first poem is called Inside the Pop-Up Box, and it is about me going to Library and Archives Canada, which is actually I met Lisa that week when I came up with this poem. So that's we're full circle here. I'll say. I'm in the library that Canada keeps my kin in. And I've brought all of the other libraries that I've ever been in with me. There's my mom's library, where as a child I saw a pop-up dinosaur, and rows of shelvings and drawers I thought must hold so many fossils. There's my dad's library of tapes in the car, and my favorite songs are the ones that tell a story. We drive all day, and my dad tells stories. And I thought every story must be a layer in the earth of stories, and I thought it's the stories that are in front of you that you remember the best. And so this time I'm in a library and it's full of glass to let the sun in. But all of the books are in metal boxes, in stacks, in rows of other metal boxes, all inside this concrete box. And the glass walls, they let the sun in, and it's warm in there. And I am warm, holding my coat and my sweater and my bag, and all of the other things that aren't my name. That I write on the clipboard. And it is not lost on me that I am here to see my great-great-grandfather's signature, and that I must offer mine to the library first. In this library, they hold the layers of the thing called Canada. And they keep it in a vault, and behind it is another vault. Across it is another row of vaults, and I can see the vaults, but no, I cannot see the vaults. Beyond us is the new building. The building, they say, will be staffed with robots, arms of a safe temperature, reminding us that to touch a document is to take a piece of it with you and to leave a piece of you behind. And it is this exchange that we must climate control in a de-reciprocal programming. And when only the dead and programmed can see my kin, no one will see my kin. See me, my layers, a proclamation by the king with a line down its center, and this layer is the treaty, this layer is the treaty, this layer is the treaty that cuts through the center of me. Whereas, in a line of red ink beneath, whereas in a red ink, her majesty, whereas I am a measure of a constitution, my kin and marked by hand, tooled in a border of fading gold foil, and with a spine that is no longer structural, but splayed, propelle cutem, on a table and numbered. Thank you. Thank you. So there's, like I said, there's lots of stories in here, and it's occasionally, thank you, bookended with facts and numerals and figures and things that sort of reinforce those stories or hint at, gesture towards where those stories came from. And this particular one is based on the curious fact that all of the surface area of land in England is actually smaller than all of the surface area of water in the Northwest Territories. And it's called "We Drowned the Land of England in the Waters of Day." It was clearly understood. There was no ownership of land, so clearly does the land in fact own me. My water from the river and my nitrogen, a buffalo protein. I am a flesh-bound manuscript of what this place might say. Hear in it how family made the treaties. Live them, love the land, this place, this creek, this river. Make a sediment of me. Make mud, make silt, and send it on its way. Saskatchewan, Athabasca, Slave, Mackenzie to the sea. If you could take the dirt of England and rejuvenate the ground, if you could manage as was always done, as people and the beavers manage, take the soil of England, cast it in the lakes across the north, and ball it up in handfuls, homes and dams, and hold the land of England to account, for Canada, for the bishopry, for the company, and record it in the manuscript of the Northwest. And then write these things that we are saying down. Write them on 2 sheets, one for you and one for me to keep. Hold these things we learn and teach them on. Tell the story written in the mud, recorded in the river, and copied days downstream. Then I would hope you carry safe your copy. And when you reach the sea, find England, compare it with this copy we have made, and stir the ocean with it. This is called Peonan. And this is a quotation from Alexander Morris, who is the Treaty Commissioner for Treaty Number 6. I will ask the interpreter to read to you what has been written, and before I go away, I will have a copy made to leave with the principal chiefs. Did you know where the river would take you when you first saw it? Watched it bend toward you, wrap you up in school and bridges in a loop. Watched it swim away even as it still holds you. Wait here. This is where we'll meet at Peonan. Did you know how much you would resemble an ocean? Gather everything, who you are, wait and gather, wait and gather. These are the things that the river says here. Speaks again downstream. Wait and gather, stories gather, witness, gather, sharing. Touch the pencil, make your mark, negotiate, agree. Did you know that when you wrote this down, the river would remember it? This is another story about Lord Strathcona, who is my favorite cartoon villain, probably because he was not a cartoon, but in fact a real person who had his hands in everything from coast to coast to coast. And I'm always surprised how little I am surprised when I find a new fact about Lord Strathcona and what he was involved in and all the things that he did. Living as I do in Strathcona and born as I was in Strathcona. This story is called The Prison Warden Bought My Uncle's Buffalo and Sold Them to Lord Strathcona, until there were almost no buffalo left. They say that the last buffalo to be born on the plain was in the care of a great uncle of mine, James McKay, at Deer Lodge on the Assiniboine River. Policy and industry murdered the great herds, and the land was changing. Trees were being planted. My great uncle would take home calves that were orphaned in the hunt. And when he died, the small herd was auctioned off to the prison warden, a Canadian soldier who came to the Northwest to kill Métis and after settled in the Northwest. But the buffalo would not be kept in the prison long. The warden owed Strathcona money, and so he sold the buffalo to him. And like all tycoons, Strathcona had no use for buffalo, and so he gave them to the National Park in the Rocky Mountains. The last buffalo to be born on the plain, they named Sir Donald after Lord Strathcona. Tourists came to take his photo. And when he died, the government took his head and stuffed it, hung it on the wall of the Banff superintendent's office, and I am told that it may have been discarded after being eaten by the mice who took residence in the head. Is there too much noise coming through? Can everyone can hear me okay? I probably should have done that before reading for whatever 10 or 15 minutes as I've done, but better late than never, as they say. Here's another story about my great uncle, James McKay. 1876, Treaty Number 6. I wake up at 6 a.m. to a weight on my chest, and I massage it until it says the word treaty. 1876, and my uncle is at Baonan, signs the treaty with a leftward slant. It is August, and the aspens bend in the wind. Dreamt I was in a library again, walking down the stairs into the basement, walking down the stairs into the earth. I see the treaty parchment on a wooden table, and it comes as no surprise that it is the land herself that holds this knowledge. 1921, Treaty Number 11. My lungs are full of spruce trees, but otherwise I am empty. I am here to witness. It is 1921, and grandfather is working for the company in Fort Providence. It is June, and that far north, the sun would not set on the British Empire. He signs the treaty with a heavy ink. Dreamt I was a library again. It is an all or nothing calling. I have language for it. I have bones. But otherwise am formless before the 7 a.m. alarm held loose on birdsong briefly between the low notes on their way to the water. I am bounded by the geese and punctuated by the dwindling of the caribou. 2020 witness continued. Dreamt I was a river again, a thread of a glacier unwinding itself in slow motion, just slow enough to dip hands in and drink. Thank you. That story was about, that last part was about my great-great-grandfather, James Allen Rowan Balsley, who was born in Winnipeg. And then he moved up north, and sort of part of the diaspora, I guess you might call it, of the Métis after 1870, when script was first starting to be initiated after the resistance. He moved up north all the way to Great Slave Lake and surrounding areas. And I read something actually recently. I haven't finished reading it because it's a long transcript from my great-grandfather, his son, who gave an interview, and he talks about how often his dad and his family had to move around because the company wouldn't let people stay in one place for very long. And he signed Treaty Number 11 in 1921. And being in Ottawa and, well, Gatineau in this case, not Ottawa, as you find out when you go there, is a really interesting place, the Preservation Center, where they keep all of the really fancy stuff. And in this case, they keep the original manuscript of the Treaty Number 11 book, as well as the other number treaties. And just like holding the weight of that as a physical object is something that is really nothing you ever really forget, or at least that I will. And I think part of the importance of the production of this book was to make sure that as a physical object, it was doing work, and it was telling a story, even just in your hands. And so there's like some conceptual poetry pieces that are in it that aim to ask you to think about not just how you're reading the book or what reading means, but what's beyond the book and what's outside of the book, and how the book is just, the text is just one thing, but everything surrounding the text is also important, especially when it comes to treaty. Let's see. How many should I do? Like a couple more, or do you want to? Yeah, okay. Let's see. I put little tabs in here, and I think I've read most of them. So I'm just going to flip and see what we spy. There's one here. I think, okay, let's talk about the University of Alberta for a little bit. That's my favorite topic to get angry about. Born as I was at the University of Alberta Hospital, it is an institution that is going through some incredibly tumultuous restructuring times, as they have branded it. And most recently, we have found out that the Humanities Center, which is the building that all of my work has sort of like orbited, is likely to be demolished or sold or some other such thing in the next year. So despite having an office, yeah, exactly, it's pretty ridiculous. So basically, the budget cuts over the past few years have come to over $200 million. But thankfully, the Conservative government has gifted us another $50 million to target enrollment improvement in STEM subjects, which really just means that they can take money from the arts and give it directly to science and engineering, who all have wonderful, beautiful new buildings, which I highly recommend you visit if you are in town. Outside of one of those beautiful buildings, which I was grateful to learn in as a science student, is the Geoscience Garden. And there's a quotation on the plaque outside of the Geoscience Garden, which is basically a whole bunch of rocks in the grass outside of the building, where you can go and look at the different types of rocks all across the country. The Geoscience Garden contains types of rock that are important to Canada's landscape and people. They are arranged so as to tell the story of the Earth's crust in Canada. The rocks are placed so that students of earth science can learn to make field observations and interpret Earth history. You could think of this as glaciers, as erratic stones of tremendous stature, immovable, set carefully as points amid the prairie, as stories, as lessons, as data, as a university more immovable than stone, setting carefully with heavy equipment as plaques to tell which corporation's courtesy brought the mountains to the campus. You could think of this as mountains. You could think of the present shape of the landscape as a story of how things are and will be again, as a lesson, as a glacier melting, as a Saskatchewan drainage slowly setting the silt of mountains. You could think of this as Edmonton, as progression, as the drink of meltwater, as the flooding in years of infrequent intensity. You could think of this as a modulation of the mud, as where the river flows and bends. You could think of this as all of the water at once, as movement, as ice contorting under its own weight and fluid. Thank you. I write about the river a lot. Nisha tells me that I only really have one poem. It's a poem about the river. She is absolutely correct. Some of those poems are not about the river, but the creeks that flow into the river. And this is not an ode to the day I fell off my bike and skinned my knee in the gravel alley behind my cousin's garage, a day that the land took a piece of me, and I had learned to ride a bike so late that I did not have the same confidence in momentum that I had had in gravity. And when you're a child, you hold yourself in an inward way when you cry, in a way that you can no longer hold yourself, in the way that the land holds you, and in all limbs and all joints way. My blood looked so red, being stained in dots through what was left of skin and dust and gravel stuck to the knee. It is the land that was stuck to me while I was extruded. And on that day, I gave something to the land, and I resented giving it up. This is not an ode to that day or to the day I was bullied and thrown in a lake because I was too small, too fat, and too much. The day and many other days I felt so small and not enough. So although this is an ode to a day in the valley, when I gave to the creek that gave me me, this is not about tobacco or a lesson from a snake. The growth sometimes means you leave a part of yourself behind. But for that bright day, in a lush overwhelming of green in a mosquito summer, where you were not bit as long as you kept moving, with porcupines and a path past depressions in the grass where deer had been sleeping, flowers and driftwood with tiny spiders, pools with even smaller fish, with water that cut so long into the earth, it made a space for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. All of that, absolutely beautiful. I feel very lucky to hear you say these poems, having read them and now getting to hear them. Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
My first question for you, and I'm going to ask a couple here. Please, if anyone has anything that they would like to ask, you can, I'm going to do a couple and then I'll open it up to the floor. You're welcome to unmic yourself or unmute yourself, or you can throw a question in the chat and I'll read it out. So how did the project emerge for you? Because it's like, it's a layered story. It's layered in your family, it's layered in your own life. How did this come into being for you?
That's a really good question. And I think it's kind of the question, as I always just like have to kind of pinch myself that sometimes you find a project that is meaningful to you and is necessary and vital and important in ways that you couldn't imagine a project to be when you are looking for a project to do. And I had tried a bunch of things. I was a zookeeper for a while, but I hurt my back, and so I wasn't able to do anything really physically demanding like that anymore. And so I wanted to go back to school to get a master's degree in science and to go back to the sponge lab and do all the cool things that I love doing as a marine scientist. And my PI, she said, yeah, you just gotta bump up your grades, get some funding, and you know, you're happy to come back. We're happy to have you back. And so I did that. I went to school, and then the next semester, which was January 2019, and I was all excited to take some English courses because I figured that would be the best way to raise my GPA. And which is like super naive, but nonetheless, it's the way it goes. And then in February, so only a month or 6 weeks later, I saw the copy of the Treaty 6 parchment I'm just going to check here. Oh, yes, I can. I will do that next. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so I saw the copy of the Treaty 6 parchment that we have at the University of Alberta Library, and it was part of a workshop, and there was a whole bunch of other things on the table, but that was the only thing that I could look at. And I thought, this is so amazing. And the librarian was telling us stories about it. I had so many questions. And every time I asked a question, the answer was always, we have no idea. We have no idea. And these questions were, how did you get this parchment? How many copies were printed? How did they print it? Where did it come from? Tell me everything you know. And they didn't know anything really, other than that it has been at the university for quite a while. And so that was just this huge mystery that I took to, mostly because my great-great-grandfather signed Treaty Number 11. And growing up, my dad was always like, Grandpa signed treaty, Grandpa signed treaty. And that was like the story. And he always told me, he's like, super important that I know this and be proud of this and understand that, you know, our family had this role in the stories that we're in. And so within a week, I was like trying to figure out as much as possible. And so that was the beginning, was basically February something, 2019. And then basically 3 years, almost 3 years exactly to the day of seeing the parchment, we hit print at Coach House Books. They were like, yep, we're going for it. Final version, send. So in 3 years, you know, it was just this like total whirlwind of trying to get everything into the shape that it is here. And I'm very grateful and very honored to be able to take part in that story. I can answer Lisa's question next. Yeah. So the title, thank you so much. The title is basically a poem that I wrote called Whitemud Walking, which was a 10-part poem that was part of a chapbook that I had done in the summer of 2019. And it was all about the Whitemud Creek and sort of how this one part of Whitemud Creek was owned by the University of Alberta, which I think is like ridiculous that a university can own, you know, a chunk of a creek, but it does. And so I wrote this poem about just like how it felt to be in that space and all the things that I saw and what it was like to, you know, see the life that was all around me and how those things are connected to many other things. And so the poem was originally just like, I don't know, a few pages and 10 sections. And then Nisha actually, my fiance Nisha Patel, for those who do not know, was like, I think you should, at one stage in the editing, was like, I think you should break this up and put it throughout the book. And so I did that, and it made the book much, much better. And it kind of gave this central theme of like, how do I maneuver through the rest of the stories in this book? And so the 10 sections of that poem became these kind of anchor points and this almost like this creek-like thing that would wind its way through the book. And the title was like really not that, it is really nothing that complicated. It's literally just me walking in the Whitemud Creek Valley and the things that I saw and encountered. And then this book has had like 3 or 4 different titles in the process. And then one day I was like, I don't know about this title. And Nisha was like, you should call it Whitemud Walking. And I said, okay, you're right. That is a much better title. And so I give all credit to Nisha on that one for sure. I hope that answers the question. It's really not a super complicated or deep answer, I know, but it's just the way it is sometimes. I like it when it's easy like that. So.
The book definitely, I noticed there were quite a few it bends in a similar, it bends time, it bends subject, it bends perception. It really plays with you, which was phenomenal. And did this, well, it sounds like the structure sort of coalesced itself with the poem and worked kind of like wound its way around. One thing I was wondering, in the opening of the book, you talk about this being a resistance to the historiography and to the the aim to dehistoricize and deneutralize the obligations. And the water is the motif of the water as this resistance, kind of, that it's not kept in boxes and lined up or kept, taken out of life. It's life itself. And will you talk about sort of those moments, like crying in the archives, for example, where the water sort of comes into these spaces, and you can feel it. It changes a bit.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a really interesting way to look at it, and I think that's very, very accurate. I think that it's important. Okay, I'll talk about this way. When you are in Ottawa and you're like going up to the main Library and Archives Canada building, it is very clear who gets to come in and who doesn't. And it's incredibly clear how difficult it is to be in those spaces. And I was going that day to look at script records. Métis script, for those that don't know, is sort of operated parallel to treaty and extinguished title to the land for Métis, as opposed to First Nations. And the records, that process was a family by family process rather than nation by nation basis. And so what that means is that the Métis are incredibly well documented in the Canadian archival system. The names of every single person is written down on these applications. And so on the one hand, it's incredibly easy to find information about your family. But it's incredibly difficult to see it and hold it and be in that space where the government is really not keen on letting just anybody come in. And you can't just like walk in and ask to see stuff. I had to basically send them an email and be like, here's what I want to do, here's what I want to see. And a lot of those notes are literally just like copied into this book. That I documented the process of accessing the documentation. And so my whole journey through these archival spaces was documented, partially because all of those requests, every time you send an email and you're like, I want to see this, this, and this, it pops up with a little number that's like, here is your request number, which means like your request to see things in the archive is itself archived, which is this like really messed up kind of like Mobius strip of like colonial process and violence. And that's the kind of thing that I wanted to get across in the book, which is that you can't really look for anything rational in this process because it just feeds back into itself constantly. And it creates something that is this like sort of like, I don't know, hydra of nonsense. And what that meant was that a lot of times you just have to kind of like take time for yourself and just like do it safely, because it's hard work and it's dangerous. And so whether that was like just like going for a walk or like looking at the river or doing both of those things together, like that's just the kind of the way to exist when those processes are the way they are against you. And I'm like incredibly privileged to be able to just like look out my window and walk down the street and like there's the North Saskatchewan like right there. And if I look to the left, that way is the mountains. If I look to the right, that way is the ocean. And those connections are embodied in the river. It is the river. And so it has a tremendous grounding effect and centering effect, while at the same time reminding me that all of this is just much larger than I can possibly handle. And so it's okay. Like it's okay that it's too much. It's okay that the work will never be finished, because that's not how the world works, right? We just kind of have to do what we do and do the best we can and be kind and share all of these lessons and laws that we have, and it's okay, you know, it's okay. It'll be okay. It's hard, but when you take that time to do the work safely, you know, that's all we can really do. And that's the resistance, right? Like that's the telling the story in the history in a safe way, in a way that honors the stories, is the resistance, because the government doesn't want us to, like, we don't learn this stuff in school, some things, but it's all through a very twisted and manipulated lens. So yeah, that was a lot, but I hope that yeah. Carla, go ahead.
Thank you, Matthew. I found that really interesting, actually, your last little like point of discussion here about how you were trying to take care of yourself working on it. I have not yet read your book, but I am really excited because it's on its way here. And I'm just curious about if you formed a practice of self-care or if this was something you felt a need for in such a difficult subject in any way.
I really wish I had like a more thorough. I have ADHD, so it's like, you know, it's really, yeah, it's like, you know, right, like it's really hard to sort of make sure that you do the things in the right order and the way you need to do them when you need to do them. And one of those problems is like care, and managing care is incredibly challenging sometimes. So for me, that can often look like, okay, so me as someone who is like chronically overworking and doing way more than I should be doing, and saying yes to more projects than I should be saying yes to, and having like a stack of things to do, you know, a mile high, that means that sometimes it's really hard not to just work to exhaustion and then just play video games for 5 hours, right? Like it's hard, but sometimes that's what that looks like. And also I'm like disabled in other ways. Like I have like a really wonky spine that makes it really difficult sometimes. Like my back went out January 1st, and I'm only now like basically recovered enough to go on a walk that's longer than, you know, to the corner. So those are the things that are difficult, but they're vitally important. And that's, I think, ultimately the best practice I can have is that I take care of my fish tank, which just, you know, made a noise. So that's how I remembered that just now. That's super important. As a like aquarist and biologist, you know, the aquarium is the thing that I love the most. So it's the hobby that sustains me to a certain extent. And then, yeah, just going for walks and like trying to be present in the place that I am and remarkably privileged to be. Or, you know, I watch a lot of TV and play a lot of video games. So that's okay. You know, you gotta do what you gotta do. I hope that helps. I know care is like a huge topic. So, you know. I don't know if anyone has any more questions.
I have one more. And you touched on it as well. There's a part of the book in which there's half of a page of treaty. Or not, it's of Alexander Morris's documentations, or right? That's, yeah. And there's only half the page. And as it was so effective as the reader, because you set up the emptiness, the potential for emptiness, I guess, but beforehand, and then you give the reader the physical emptiness. And you talk of yourself in, or not necessarily yourself, but in one of the poems, there's the talk of being a vessel, being empty, and allowing things in. What do you see filling in that emptiness? Or not necessarily, if you don't want to go that far, that might be a bit much, but.
Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
Well, I mean, however you want to fill that space.
Yeah. That's probably like the part of the book I'm the most proud of, because it's just this like incredibly complicated conceptual piece that's super nerdy. And it's like as like someone who does a lot of visual poetry, I'm always like really stoked when I can do visual based work. And that one was a particular challenge for lots of reasons, but as like a layout and book design nerd, it's like that was the one that I probably spent more time on than just about anything else on any one piece, probably because I had to redo it like 4 times. And what you're seeing on this in this section, so I'm going to answer that in a couple different ways. So what you're seeing in this, so when you look at the side of the book, sorry, my shoulder is kind of wonky right now, so it's tough. So you can see this. And so this is an effect called bleed, where you have the text or the image or whatever inside the book goes past the edge. It bleeds off of the edge. And so what they do is they print it and then they cut it on the other sides. And you end up with this cut edge where you can see that section of the book. And it is indeed like it looks like half a book, but like conceptually what it is you are holding the margins of this book lead you to look out the back and through the center of that other book, and it flips it in on itself. And what that does conceptually is that, because this is like, if you think so, this is like the left page and this is the right page, but on the original book, you know, this is the right page and this is the left page. So it has this mirror world almost kind of effect, right? Bizarro world kind of thing. It's a conceptual piece, so there's a lot of like, you could talk about what it means for a long time, rather than just the mechanics of doing it. But in terms of like holding space, it is about holding space, and that creating space to grieve, creating space to honor the stories that aren't being told or that are literally put in the margins, and to center those spaces rather than to let them become marginalized. So that's the thing, right? Is that on a very simple level, it's just centering the margins of the stories that aren't being told, because those are the central stories that have become marginalized. Yeah, and like, it's funny because that's always the page where like my parents or like that's always the set of part of the book that people are like, is it supposed to be like this? Like, is this a printing error or something? I love that because, you know, I'm sitting here as a PhD student in English thinking about conceptual visual poetry, and like, you know, it's just a thing, you know, it's not that complicated, and I make it more complicated. So that's on me. It always reminds me that Stuff's just got to be simple sometimes, and that's the best. But yeah, I don't know if that I hope that answers part of the question. There's a lot about that particular one. Yeah.
That's perfect. Yes, absolutely. It looks like we have a question in
Yeah, Carla's got a question here.
Yeah.
Who have been your influences for your visual and concrete poetry? I am playing with that myself, and I'm so curious who are your influences. Honestly, Jordan Abel is like the number one person who has been incredible. Yeah, like just I would love to just sit here for 2 hours and talk about Jordan's work rather than my own. I think that's the easiest thing in the world. I think I was really, really glad and fortunate and privileged that when I went back to university to try to get into the science program again, I ended up in Jordan's class. And that was actually his first class at the university level that he'd ever taught on his like first day of teaching at the University of Alberta. And I just like thank my lucky stars every day that I was in that room that day, and that his work has just constantly pushed me to rethink not just text and books and pages, but how those things interact with the land and our relationship to the land. And yeah, Jordan's amazing. So that's like number one. There's a lot of other people whose work I really, really love. And, you know, sometimes it's not visual poetry. Sometimes someone will do something that just makes you think about regular text in a new way. And I think that's the key, is to kind of look for those moments where you're reading something that just sparks something that you might want to play with. Maps do that a lot for me, actually. I look at a lot of maps. I look at a lot of old maps in the archive. And sometimes you can see like maps that are written over and have things written in the margins or drawings on them or things traced or scratched out. And all of that is super fascinating and very helpful. People like Claudia Rankin, like her work is beyond anything anyone else does. I love Douglas Kearney. His work is just can't get enough of his work. I'm looking this way because this is where one of our many bookshelves are. But yeah, there's lots of poets like that. And when it comes to visual work, I think as a visual artist, if I were to answer this question about visual art, it's actually very much the same way, is that you just have to keep an open mind and you have to look at all of the things that you're encountering through that lens of like the visual. And all of those things will give you information and help you out in new ways. Yeah, microscope stuff. I love microscopes. Like that's so much fun. So like as a scientist, like there's all of these other things that are very inspiring that people don't typically think of as inspiring from a visual arts perspective, but anything can be. I know that's like the worst answer. Anything can be inspiration, but it's more about how you approach it and how you look at it and practice. Yeah. The worst answer ever. Just practice. Have you seen the microscope? Yes. Yeah. Right. And that's a great example of taking something that we think we're familiar with and then the materiality of beating. And really that's actually a better answer than I could have given, because that's all of the answers I was trying to get at in one, which is the materiality of all the things around you tells you a story and shows you things in ways that you don't necessarily expect, whether it's, you know, beads or leather or wood or whatever, right? Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question or query if anyone has anything. Otherwise.
Yeah, I am like available on things like Twitter and Instagram. So if you have any burning questions or want to chat about any of this stuff, just reach out, let me know. Yeah. I can put my handle in the, there you go. That's me. Marcy, yes, Marcy Joe. Thank you.